Hello, hello, and thank you for joining me again today. This is Jay, and you are watching Life Changes. This is a show where I have an opportunity to pick a chart, usually a famous person, or they may not be that famous. They could just be a really successful person, like a business person, and I talk about their chart. Usually I just pick a specific day, a specific event, and the day that event took place, and then I explore it to determine what astrology had to say about whatever it is that they did. So today is no different. I'm going to choose a person's chart to explore, and that person is none other than LeBron James. And specifically, I wanted to look into, instead of an actual event, I do talk about an event, but I want to look at like 4 reasons why he has a high net worth. That's something I wanted to look into this season, I guess you could say, is just look at high net worth individuals and see what in their chart suggests that they would do that, because everybody's chart is different. And you can have 5 multimillionaires or 3 billionaires, and everybody's chart is going to look a little different, even though they are successful in that way. So I wanted to do his chart like that. I wanted to see what in his chart suggests that he would be a high net worth individual. So just in case, maybe you're from another country or you're not that familiar with basketball and you don't really know who LeBron James is, I will tell you. So Ramon, I think I'm saying his middle name right, Ramon James Sr., born December 30th, 1984, is an American professional basketball player for the Los Angeles Lakers of the NBA, nicknamed King James. He's the NBA's all-time leading scorer and has won 4 NBA championships from 10 NBA final appearances, having made 8 consecutive appearances between 2011 and 2018. He also won the inaugural NBA Cup in 2023 with the Lakers and has won 3 Olympic gold medals. And as a member of the U.S. national team, James is widely considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time. So there's a little bit about LeBron James, okay? So when I looked at his chart, just a few things that I noticed. One I noticed is his natal MC, or midheaven, is conjunct his natal Mars. So I think that's pretty impactful. Pretty much anytime you look it up, like if you Googled it, things like that, when there's planets that are close to your midheaven, they will all tell you the same thing, that's pretty important to have that. And so anytime you have a planet really close to your midheaven, just know that that's an indication that planet is important to your career or your reputation, somehow who you are in terms of how you present yourself out in the world. So what this says to me about LeBron is that he's a naturally competitive person. And to me, this increases the chances that he would end up in sports, because Mars is an aggressive planet. It's a planet of doing things. And so that means he had a natural drive to do something important or specific, or whatever it is he wanted to do. He was not going to be denied, if you will. And those of us that remember or are familiar with LeBron, you know that he entered the NBA pretty early on. So he didn't really want to waste any time, and that's very characteristic of Mars. All right. Second thing I noticed is that he has Aries over his 11th house. This is a pretty good tie because Mars is the planet that is the ruler of the sign Aries. And so Mars doesn't like to play around or mess around too long, and neither does Aries. And so for him to have the ruler of his 11th house in the 10th house and Aries over the 11th house, that just further convinces me that he was going to be very driven. And of course, 11th house, if you have not had an opportunity, I highly recommend after this video that you take a look at my video on 11th house, where I talk more into detail about it. But basically, the 11th 11th house represents several things: your friends, your associations, things like that. But it's also where like the money from your career. It's actually considered the like a third money house, which was new to me for a long time. I was not convinced that the 11th house was a money house, but after further study, I am convinced that it really is. A lot of times the money that you make in your career is tied to the sign over the 11th house. I noticed that. So with Aries over the 11th house, specifically when you consider progress charts, and you hear me talk about progress charts a lot on here, basically progressions, not only do the planets progress, but the angles progress too. And so Aries, he was born with Aries over the 11th house, but as time went on, Aries actually slides over the 10th house. And so that's why a lot of times when it comes to determining what someone is most likely to do career-wise, I'm more likely to look at the 11th house, because I know as you get older, that's where whatever sign that is and whatever areas or specialties or fields of work that is, that's the one that you're more likely to be in. And with Aries is mostly associated with, just like with Mars, physical things like military, fighting, boxing, modeling could fall under that, as well as sports. And so this really matches what he ended up concentrating on, is the sports aspect. I suppose this could have worked out a different way, but I mean, I don't see him modeling but no issue with that, no shade or anything, but I don't see him going into modeling. It just doesn't seem like his character. But he could have ended up in the military, I guess you could say, maybe something like that. But he chose basketball, and because that's what he chose, that's where he decided to end up. So you have natal MC, number one, natal MC conjunct his natal Mars. And then you have his Aries over his 11th house. So third is he has his natal Jupiter and his natal 8th house. So the 8th house, ironically, is considered another money house, among other things. But the 8th house is nicknamed the house of other people's money. Mainly that's because it's usually not money that you earn. It's money that is, I want to say, it's given to you. In some cases, it can be given to you. It could be things like loans, royalties, commissions. It could be inheritances, insurance policies, stuff like that. It could also be joint resources or shared resources with a person, someone else. It could be a spouse. It could be if you're in business with someone and they are putting up some of their money for your business. That could be along those lines. I think the 8th house and the 11th house can kind of play in that a little bit. But the 8th house is definitely considered a money house, among other things. And so with him having Jupiter there, and Jupiter most definitely representing money, among other things, of course, but it is the planet that's mostly most likely associated with money and abundance of money. So for him to have Jupiter here and a money was considered a money house, and I feel like it increased his chances of making money. I was once reading some posts, I believe it was on Facebook or something like that, and someone said something along the lines of, somehow the subject of the 8th house came up. And there were different people that had planets in their 8th house, like Venus, especially with Venus or like Jupiter. They said people were more likely to just give the money, even complete strangers. And so for that reason, sometimes you will find like really wealthy people or people that like create businesses. A lot of times they will have some planets in the 8th house. Not all the time. There's always differences. Remember, everybody's chart is different. And everybody's chart has a different way of explaining what's going on with that person and why. But that is something that happens sometimes with people that have planets in the 8th house, especially what is called a benefic planet, like Venus and Jupiter. They're like almost like good luck planets, I guess, if you will. Like good things tend to happen. And so when people tend to have those planets there, sometimes they find that it's a little easier for them to get money. And so In LeBron's case, I think him having Jupiter in the 8th house was definitely a help for him. All right. And last but not least, he has natal Venus in the 9th house. So 9th house, not a money house. Maybe you're thinking I was going to say that, but it's not a money house. It is a house of, one thing, it rules travel, education, things like that. But it's also a house of big goals and big business. So, and just so you know, it's a house that I guess you could say is naturally associated with the planet Jupiter in a way. And so they kind of almost represent the similar things. I won't say the same thing, but similar things. And so for him to have Venus there, which Venus to a lesser degree can relate to money. It's most closely noted for being about love, affection, likability. And it may suggest him having a national, maybe even an international likability, which could assist him in making a lot of money, which I think that could be the case for him. Overall acceptance, and that acceptance leads to an increase of money. But him having Venus in the 9th house, I feel like it's definitely a help for him. And when it comes to his, like for instance, when it comes to the year that he signed his $1 billion deal with Nike, it was like December 2015. Around that time, he had his solar return. That's the solar return, the Venus in his solar return chart. He had his solar return Venus conjunct his prenatal solar eclipse. I know that that's a lot. And I mentioned this a little bit in, I think, a couple of other episodes. So basically, the prenatal solar eclipse is basically what it sounds like. It's the last solar eclipse before his birth. So it was his solar return Venus was conjunct that particular spot. And given that Venus is closely tied to his not just money, but just bigger goals, things that he wanted to do, that prenatal solar eclipse was in his 6th house, which was work. So that allowed him to have something really big happen in his career that's associated to work, but that's abundant and allows him to extend and expand his wealth, his influence, and things like that. So he also had his prenatal solar eclipse in a decadent in Jupiter. And we already discussed his natal Jupiter is in his 8th house. And so that connection between the Venus with the prenatal solar eclipse and then Jupiter being the decadent for the prenatal solar eclipse, to me suggests like that leads right back to the 8th house. First of all, a big transition or a big transaction or some type of transformation, and then in Jupiter being involved, that having something to do with money for him. Also, last thing I noticed is around that time of the Nike deal, he had his solar return 2nd house over his natal 8th house. So that's like a money house over another money house, basically. But it references the changes. 8th house being a house of change, and then the 2nd house being about earned income. Now, the deal was signed off of a contract, right? But I guess you could say it was based on like the work that he'd done previously, given that he'd already been in the league and already been doing really well with championships and stuff. So that's what I saw, and that's the impression I get about why LeBron James has a high net worth from an astrological standpoint. We can look at it from a practical standpoint. When I look at his chart, those are things that I saw that stood out to me, and in terms of things that have led to his increase in money and wealth. So I hope you got something from that. Definitely take a look at your own chart. Look at your own prenatal solar eclipse point. You can pull that up at astro.com and you can find it that way. But in the meantime, I will see you next time. Take care.